friends. This is Red Ice Creations Radio. Thank you for tuning in. We are recording this from Sweden. My name is Henrik Palmgren. I'm the editor and webmaster of redicecreations.com. If you are new to this program and or this website, let me just mention that Red Ice Creations Radio is available with a new show every Thursday and Sunday online through our website. We have an archive going back to about a year, all free material there. We do also have a subscriber section with subscriber interviews with our guests for all you guys who want to go a little bit deeper into some of these subjects and hear even more. So take a look at that if you are interested. All right, I'm very glad that you are here today. I'm really excited about today's program. We have the great pleasure of welcoming Ralph Ellis to the show. He is an author, historian, and researcher, and he's behind a number of titles. Jesus, Last of the Pharaohs, Thoth, Architect of the Universe, Eden in Egypt, to name a few. And his latest two books are called Cleopatra to Christ and Scota, Egyptian Queen of the Scots. Ralph's website is edfu-books.com. That's edfu-books.com. And the series of books that Ralph puts out is about theological and historical re-evaluation. And Ralph's name and research and reference have come up a number of times on this program through other guests. So it's great to have Ralph with us today to be able to talk with him about his work and books, of course. So with that, let's say hello to Ralph and welcome. Thank you for coming on the show. It's a pleasure to have you here, Ralph.
Yes, indeed. Very good to be on the show, indeed. It's nice to get exposure in the rest of Europe as well. I've been concentrating mostly on Britain and America, of course. But Europe is, there's a big market and a big interest.
Ah, excellent. Yeah, it's great to have you. And as I said, Ralph, your name and reference have come up a number of times on this show through our good friend Michael Tsarion, Jay Kutsi, etc. And so it's great to have you here. And I kind of want to begin today, if we can, to talk a little bit about you for people who aren't, familiar with you and your work. It's always interesting to hear how people get started with the research, and you have released a series of titles that kind of follows this red line, I think. And how did you first stumble upon these topics and your research that you're doing now?
Well, I suppose I started originally with my father when I was very young, because he was interested in theology. Not to the degree that I am, but as youngsters we used to go around all of the cathedrals of Europe, and we had a big interest in it. But I suppose the interest really started with, I suppose, the sort of von Daniken era, when suddenly von Daniken came up with the idea that there was an alternative history possibly out there, and that sort of fascinated me. So I linked that alternative history in with the fact that we don't know a great deal about our biblical history, because I started studying the Bible having gone around all the major cathedrals with my father. And I couldn't believe that we had this history that nobody seems to know much about. It seemed to me that the biblical story almost happened on a different planet, because none of it links in with standard history. And I just could not believe that was true. How could that be so? We've got this historical book that has come down to us through the millennia. And none of it matches in with normal history. And so there's only two options, and a lot of archaeologists have gone down the second option, and the second option is that it's all mythology, that someone made it all up, that it's just a story. But I didn't really believe that was true either, because there's too much history and baggage attached to it for someone to have just made this story up completely. And so the other option is that it's a true history, but maybe a little distorted, and therefore it's because of this distortion that we cannot find the characters in the Bible. That's the theory that I ran with, and it became very obvious very early on that was the true history, that things have been distorted and we've forgotten our history.
Very interesting. It seems to be quite a daunting task, I guess, to take on the historical and I guess even
Well,
archaeological.
Yes, it's been done before, and this is why I think it's not exactly a cover-up or a conspiracy, but this has been done before many centuries ago, many millennia ago. People knew more about this history than we seem to know now. I mean, if you read Josephus, for instance, Josephus Flavius, the 1st century AD historian, he clearly says that the early Israelites were the Hyksos pharaohs of Egypt. Now, that's what I had started on when I first started this investigation. And here Josephus Flavius is agreeing with me entirely. Well, he obviously came before I did. So even in that era, people knew that there was a different alternative history, perhaps, to the one that's currently understood today. So I think knowledge has been lost, and it's about time that we regained it. Yeah,
indeed. I mean, how long have you been, as you say, you have obviously a huge, your background in regards to your father and so forth into studying these areas, but when did you kind of first stumble upon the connection to Egypt, because that seems to be a huge, area in your research?
Yes, that probably happened about 15 years ago or so, when I was researching the Exodus, and I came across, of course, this alternative Exodus, which happens to be very, very similar to the biblical one. For instance, I'll just read out a few of the sort of topics, and this is from history, of course. This has nothing to do with the Bible. There were a people in Egypt, and they were known as shepherds, and one of their kings was called Jacob, and they wore earrings, and they had their hair in ringlets, and they were circumcised, and they were involved in a war with the southern Egyptians. But at the same time as this, there were storms and darkness and plagues, and as a result of this, there was a civil war, and some 500,000 of these people, these shepherds, were ejected from Egypt on a big exodus, and they set off from Pi-Ramesses, and they went to Jerusalem, and they were quite a large military force, and they destroyed Jericho. Now, does that sound a wee bit familiar?
Yeah, it does.
But that's not biblical history. This is real history. This is the history of the Hyksos people of Egypt. Were the Lower Egyptians, and they are thought to have been immigrants. We're not quite sure, but they took over Lower Egypt. That's the northern half of Egypt, and they set up their own kingship there. So Egypt was divided, as it often was during its history. So there was a southern pharaoh and there was a northern pharaoh. And these northern pharaohs were called the Hyksos, or the shepherd kings. And of course all of the patriarchs within the Bible, of course, are called shepherds. But they seem to have the same name. So, one of the pharaohs of this dynasty was called Jacob, and of course one of the patriarchs was called Jacob. So it just seemed to me hugely unlikely that there would be two exoduses that were so similar to each other during biblical history, during Egyptian history, that these two exodus events had to be the same event.
Yeah.
That just seemed to be a given truth.
So
they were too similar for any other logical deduction. But that one item changes the whole of the Bible, because it means that suddenly you've got to start equating a lot of the Old Testament texts with Egyptian history. And people don't want to do that because that upsets a lot of our current understanding of biblical history.
Sure.
And so people shy away from that, whether they are theologians, whether they are Egyptologists. There are too many people out there with things to lose if they start going off on this tangent. If they belong to a religious institution, it will go against their beliefs. If they belong to if they belong to a university, they might even lose funding. Who knows? If they start going off on these different tracks. And so people shy away from it. But it's quite obvious to me that the most of the biblical history was based in Egypt. And if we start looking at the texts, we find that a lot of the texts in the Bible, a lot of what it's saying, actually comes out of Egyptian history. And there are quite a few of these, whether it's, Psalm 104 is the most famous of these. Psalm 104 comes from the hymn to the Arton, which was written by the Pharaoh Akhenaten.
Yeah.
But there are a number of these. The Joseph plot of Joseph going down into Egypt it essentially is the same as the tale of the two brothers, which is an Egyptian text. The Nile turning red, which is a strange incident in the Bible that no one can really explain, well, that comes from the destruction of mankind, which is another Egyptian text. The Lord's Prayer comes from the Maxims of Annie. The Sermon on the Mount, which is, the famous part of the New Testament, also comes from the Maxims of Annie. Especially the bit about where Jesus says, God does not like it if you indulge in vain repetitions. That comes straight from the Maxims of Annie. Proverbs, there's a great section of Proverbs comes out of the instructions of Amenemopet, and it's almost word for word. And so it goes on. So it's quite clear. And if this is not generally known in the public, but if you read the theological texts and so on, it is actually quite well known within people who look at the text. These are direct comparisons between these two. So people know that there are direct comparisons, but they're not really making it known to the general public. So, but the bottom line is that much of the teachings, not only of the Old Testament, but of the New Testament as well, the teachings of Jesus, actually come straight out of Egyptian history. And so there is a direct link there between Judaic history and Egyptian history, which is basically what I'm saying has happened all the way through.
Yeah, and it seems like a religious authority should be kind of excited about this, because it's in a historical sense. Then it would actually verify the Bible. But as you say, this information isn't, I guess, received that well. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's dangerous. Yes, I would see it in the same way that you see it, that it actually makes the whole of the Bible more believable, because you can actually find it. You can find real information in there, real people, real text. To me, it makes it more authoritative if it's based in real history.
Sure.
But there are lots of problems for theologians, because it changes the theology that they are trying to teach. It means that the teachings of Jesus were not unique. And that has a big bearing on what they're trying to teach. It means that Jesus was just regurgitating old teaching. He was not a unique character. He was just one of a long line of characters who were teaching these same truisms, these same teachings. They've turned Jesus into such a unique God figure that to have him just as one in a great line of princes, because I believe he was a prince of Egypt, of course,